recognizing what we're willing to do ahead of time enables us to make better, more informed choices from a range of possible interventions when we are under stress.
Mhm.
And we're gonna talk through some of these.
Bias, bigotry, and marginalization of people in minoritized groups happens every day. And these kinds of bias or marginalizations can be overt, intentional acts like somebody using slurs or harassing someone or even resorting to violence. They may also be unintentional but still harmful things based in carelessness or ignorance. Somebody just doesn't know any better or isn't thinking about what they say or how they say it. A common question for a lot of people who seek to be allies is, what do I do when I see that happen in front of me? Like, how should I respond? How should I care for my neighbors, or what should I do when these kinds of things happen in front of me? So today we are going to be talking about bystander interventions, how and when to take action when marginalizing actions happen in front of us.
Welcome to the Affirming Practice podcast. My name is Casey Ann Brimmer. I use they, them pronouns. I am a doctor of social, political, ethical, and cultural thought. And I've been having these conversations about identity-based issues and social justice for more than 20 years.
And my name is Bob Irian. I am a pastor currently serving in central Pennsylvania, and I care a lot about creating and supporting the kinds of communities where people don't just survive but can actively thrive. And so, because of that, this work is very important to me in making sure that there is space for everyone to come to the table. So, today we're talking about bystander interventions. And can you share a little bit about an experience you've had where someone intervened well or intervened poorly or didn't intervene at all, and what you what your experience with that was?
So I can think of several instances, but I want to think of an everyday one
Mm-hmm.
that I see. And this is going to sound absurd, but it's the aggressive, properly gendering of me. So I've got a lot of people in my life who do not gender me properly. They use she, her pronouns when I use they, them. And there are some folks in my life whose response to that, based off of what I've asked them to do, is to just consistently and intentionally properly gender me. It's an indirect way to do it, but they will use like the right pronouns repeatedly. Like they'll find a way to use it every time someone else uses the wrong ones. Um, and it's very entertaining to watch, but it's also like a form of bystander intervention that has made a difference for me. And then the other would be I was in a situation where someone was saying something about people of color, like during like Black Lives Matter period of time. And I was in a leadership position in this space, and what they were saying wasn't cool. Can't remember the exact phrasing. And my interruption was, we need to redirect this conversation into like the topic at hand. It was a trans support group. And we need to recognize that intersectionality exists and that trans people of color are harmed at disproportionate rates to other communities. And so the redirect was the bystander intervention in that case. And there were no people of color in the room that I know of. But it was important for me to intervene, even when there, as far as I could tell, were no immediately affected parties. So those are the examples I can think of at the moment.
Okay. I can certainly think of times in my life when, I've heard people throwing around slurs, right? And just being so initially shocked by that and then shocked by like the um, generalized acceptance of that, that I became frozen. And I did not speak up. And I carry those memories with me of the times when that was an opportunity to intervene and I didn't. Whether it was a slur directed at LGBTQ people, or certainly when I was younger, I used to hear people throw the N word around a lot, and you know I have a lot of those memories of times when I had an opportunity to intervene and didn't. Um, on the other hand, I had a more recent opportunity where somebody was, and it was actually a person who, up until that moment, I had a great deal of respect for professionally, who I was quite shocked to hear start using some really gross anti-trans slurs and just some like misinformation about the whole trope of trans people being predators looking to victimize women and children, and all of that. And I'm not going to go into all of those details, but and again, I was utterly shocked, but this time I was not just shocked, I was also outraged, and I immediately spoke up and said, "Hey, whoa, where what on earth makes you think that it's okay to say those kinds of things?" Because first of all, those are just grotesque slurs that civilized people don't use, and secondly, the things that you are saying that are not slurs are slanders. Like, the vast majority of predators who victimize children actually identify as cishet men. Like, statistically, you're simply what you're saying is simply false. And I don't know that I changed that person's mind or that I changed any of their future behavior because I haven't interacted with them since. But at least in that place and in that moment, somebody heard the nonsense being challenged.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is the one of the differences between those two instances that you just described is one of the differences your level of self-preparation and self-confidence in addressing the issue at hand?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest difference, is that I have come to understand how important those bystander interventions are. And I'm just a little quicker on my feet than I used to be. And I've heard enough of those kinds of horrible things said that they no longer like shock me as much as they used to. So I guess in some ways it is preparation, maybe not the kind of preparation I would like it to be, but some of it was the fact that I had thought through beforehand, and other in other cases with people who were actually strangers to me in online conversations or whatever, I had already done some of that challenging and redirecting. And so when it happened with a colleague who uh, up until that moment I had a great deal of professional respect for, it was much easier for me eh, to intervene and respond. And really, it was in some ways a matter of, oh my gosh, I can't believe you are somebody I trusted and respected, and you're behaving like this, and gross.
Yeah. I just realized that maybe we should explain what we mean by bystander intervention.
Please do.
So, a bystander in a situation like we're talking about is slightly removed from the situation. They're not being targeted, they're not doing the targeting. They're maybe witnessing it, they're hearing it in some way, they're seeing it in some way. And there's a thing called bystander effect where no one acts who is a bystander because they anticipate someone else will.
Right.
Bystander intervention asks us to be the one who will.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what we're talking about today is being prepared to intervene in one way or another.
Right.
Yeah. Want to make sure we cover that.
And that preparation is important because um you know what we used to say when I was in the service was, those who fail to plan to fail. And simply being prepared for those kinds of situations tends to make us, at least I have found it tends to make me much more effective in how I choose to intervene. So, um, that it actually brings up a really good foundational question, I think, which is, why intervene at all? Why does it matter if bystander interventions happen or don't happen?
Ooh. For me, as someone who has been the bystander who intervenes and who has had bystanders intervene, it's important because, like, as someone who's had bystanders intervene on my behalf, it makes me feel seen, heard, and valued. I know I'm not alone in the situation, even if the person doesn't understand it perfectly, even if they don't do it perfectly. To have someone intervene to try on my behalf means a lot to me. Blow up whatever the person who's causing harm was intending.
Mhm.
Whether or not they intended to cause harm or not, to have someone intervene and say, "Hey, that's not the language you use. That's not okay what you're doing." It's a teaching moment and it takes the pressure off the marginalized person to have to do the intervening. Being marginalized shouldn't make you the interventionist
Right,
inherently. It's not our job to teach.
right, exactly. I would also say from my perspective, and we've talked about this a lot. I'm a cishet white male, and I am literally awash in privilege from the moment I wake up in the morning. But bystander interventions matter for me too, um, because there have been times when I have felt like somebody should say something, but at times in my life when I was maybe less obnoxious or just had more flips to give than I do now, I might have been hesitant or shy or reticent about speaking up and intervening myself. And when someone speaks up and intervenes, I feel empowered to say, yeah, I agree. This is not okay.
Yeah.
It can be easy for people to feel alone in their opposition to this kind of bigotry and harmful behavior. And conversely, it can be easy for, bigots to feel like they're a majority if nobody calls them out on it.
Yeah.
If they're not challenged, they ironically, if they're not challenged, they assume everybody agrees with them. And the people who disagree with them assume that they're the only ones who don't agree. And so I think it's important for people who, when you see something that is just fundamentally morally wrong, to speak up and say, hey, that's not okay.
Yeah. I think see something, say something to co-opt what the government is trying to do there with surveillance. If you see something wrong that's happening, something unethical, something racist, sexist, heterosexist, homophobic, whatever the thing is, if you see that and you say something, we start to shift the norm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we make it clear that that's not something I will tolerate in my presence, and it's okay for me to be that person. And that takes a certain level of confidence, etc. But also, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. It's evil thrives when good men do nothing. It goes back to that thing. that we've talked about multiple times. And it also goes back to the fundamentals of like the importance of communication in this work. And sometimes someone's going to say, like, hey, this thing is happening and I'm not okay. Can you please help?
Mhm.
And sometimes you're going to see a thing and no one's going to ask you to help, but there are ways for you to intervene that can help. And there are risks, which I know we're getting to in a moment, but there are risks to intervening. You could do it wrong, but the willingness to try also makes a difference. Um, yeah,
And I come back to sometimes it can make all the difference in the world for that targeted person simply to know they are not alone.
definitely.
And that's important. And
Yeah.
and I agree wholeheartedly with what you said about, evil thrives when good people do nothing. And what we tolerate, what we allow to happen in our presence is what we will get more of.
Okay, fun fact. You want to know where I first heard that phrase? Della Reese's character on Touched by an Angel.
Okay.
Things that I remember. Okay.
Okay. So you mentioned risk, and intervening can carry risks. There are risks to the person who's making the intervention. You might suddenly be uncool, right? You might be risking being that guy or that person in your workplace or your peer group or whatever. You may, depending on what the situation is, there could even be the risk of active harm and you becoming the target instead of the person you're intervening on behalf of. Um, there's also, risks to the person that the intervention is made on behalf of. You know, Sometimes intervening on someone's behalf can raise the stakes of the intervention or of the situation rather than lowering them. So, talk a little bit about the importance of acknowledging those risks beforehand.
So it's important to recognize what risks you can take on.
Mhm.
So there are certain conversations that I know I can't have because it's too high of a risk for me. And those are conversations around, say, abuse or um, sexual assault, things like that, where having those conversations is too high a risk for me, and I'm going to let someone else intervene.
Mhm.
I'm not going to let anyone be assaulted. I will throw down. But if it's a conversation, I'm more likely to walk away because I could be harmed in that conversation, right? There is risk to self if you are intervening of the you becoming the target of being arrested if you're, say, at a protest or somehow violence ensues. There's a risk of violence. People don't like being called out, and how we do this matters. And this podcast episode is the basics. It's the bare minimum in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
but it's recognizing that there is risk to self. There is a risk you will do it wrong. There is a risk that the person you are intervening on behalf is like, no, I got this. Don't be a white savior right now. Right? Or cis savior or insert
Right.
whatever. But you have to weigh the risks in all the concepts that you can. And it's really, 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 really important that we weigh those risks ahead of time.
Mhm.
We know what are we willing to do. So if I'm going to a protest, I know whether or not I am willing to be on the front lines and deal with the police.
Right. When Gretchen and I go to a protest together, as we are walking from the car to the actual protest, we check in and say, okay, which one of us is okay to get arrested and which one of us needs to not get arrested so that they can bail the other one out. And by and large, we've just decided that if anybody's going to get arrested, it's going to be her, because oddly enough, I'm more likely to tamp down my mouth and not get arrested, and she's more likely to be the one yelling in the police chief's face or the mayor's face. And no, that's not a metaphor, that's an example. Um, yeah.
I
Every,
love her.
everybody who knows us thinks that, she's the restraining influence on me. And sometimes, yeah, but sometimes not.
Yeah. Recognizing what we're willing to do ahead of time enables us to make better, more informed choices from a range of possible interventions when we are under stress.
Mhm.
And we're gonna talk through some of these like risk consideration things. One of those being, again, 2016, 2017, height of Black Lives Matter protests. Um, People were wearing safety pins as a way to indicate you're safe with me, but there was no like baseline of what does this mean. There's this movement, but there wasn't a baseline of what that safety pin meant. So, are you willing to take on risks of bodily harm, arrest, harassment? What are you willing to do? And because the safety pin had no standardized, this is what I'm agreeing to, in some ways it made it harder to trust wearing them, like the people wearing them,
Mhm.
because it wasn't an agreement to be safe for everyone marginalized either, or to a basic minimum acceptance of risk.
Right.
So recognizing what are we willing to do if we are symbolizing our willingness to intervene. If we're wearing those safety pins, for example, what are we willing to do? If you're wearing a "you are safe with me" rainbow badge, what does that mean? Your shirt, yeah, I didn't even realize that. Like
I was not thinking about that when I put this shirt on this morning either. So,
if I see that shirt, I'm going to at minimum assume you're not the person I have to educate. And if something's going down and I come to you, I'm not going to be the one with the target on my back, or I'm not going to be the only one with a target on my back.
and you're not going to get blown off. Right.
Yeah, I'm going to at least assume you'll be like, hey, there's not a whole lot I can do, but I can stand with you. I can wait for someone to get here. Would you like a ride somewhere?
Hmm.
Would you like me to walk you to your car?
Hmm.
Whatever. I'm going to assume that there is at least the willingness to try.
Right. And another example of risk consideration. There's an organization that I volunteer with, um, called Silent Witness Peacekeepers, and basically what we do is we go to Pride events, and we are sort of a buffer between people who are there for the Pride event and the hate preachers who show up with bullhorns and protest signs to tell people they're going to hell. Um, and we are the silent. We don't engage in debates with these folks, and we are there again as peacekeepers. And basically we just sort of serve as a buffer between the two groups. And the first year I ever did this, and one of the things we've talked about in training with that group is know your own limits. When you need to step away from that group of people who are spewing hate through a bullhorn, you know, if you need to step away from that, know that. And it's okay to ask, hey, I need a break. Can you find somebody to sub in on the line for me for a little while or whatever? And just the way I'm wired in my own life experience is like, I've been yelled at before by professionals, and those clowns are not going to hurt my one remaining feeling. So they can yell at me all day long, all they want. And when I go to those events and I go do things with Silent Witness, I make sure I wear my collar on purpose for two reasons. One, so that members of the community know that those clowns don't speak for all people of faith. And the other thing is, it's kind of like being a rodeo clown and wearing a bright red shirt, right? Like they're going to home in on me, and if they're yelling at me, they're not yelling at the people who are coming in and out. So, but my
Definitely.
first year doing this, and just a really quick example of a risk consideration. End of the day, these guys are, barking through their bullhorns, and there's this kid walking out of pride and like freezes when they see this gauntlet of people that they have to get through. And I saw them and saw the kid, and I walked over and I said, "Are you ready to leave?" I said, "Okay, are you a little nervous about getting past those people over there?" "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take my big rainbow golf umbrella and I'm going to stick it over my left shoulder here as like a shield. And you're going to stand right here on my right side and you're going to stay right next to me right here. And we're going to walk right out past them. Okay. And you're not going to look at them. You're not going to listen to them. You're not going to talk to them. You're going to keep your eyes on me and you're going to tell me what you thought was the coolest thing about being at Pride today. And we're going to walk right out of here. And I'm going to make sure you get out of here safe and get home safe. Okay." "Uh-huh." And that's what we did. And we walked through. And of course, we had to stop at the sidewalk and wait for the light. We couldn't time the light right. And we had to wait for a walk signal. And they're like, circling in to yell at us and yell at me and yell at the kid and whatever. But get the kid across the street and down to the end of the block and on their way. And like when I got back over to the Peacekeeper line, one of the people who was on the line with me said, "Wow, I'm really glad you walked that kid out of here. I would have been scared to death to walk into that group of people, even escorting someone." And like, okay, that's fair. You know, and what you're doing right here, right now is just as important. And that was a place where I did not personally feel triggered walking into that group, but that's not an intervention that everybody can, a risk that everybody can take on. Whereas there's other risks that that person could have taken on that I couldn't. And it's just a matter of knowing which ones you can do and not do.
And I mean, I would suck at silent witness peacekeepers because I want to ask them for their references. I
Right,
want to ask them for their citations. I want to intervene in a different way that may be more antagonistic than peacekeeping.
right.
It's a
And
problem.
that's part of it. And that's one of the things that we emphasize as we're training new volunteers is if standing there silent and driving these people crazy by not responding to them is not your bag, that's fine. We understand that, but we can't use you because what we're doing only works if we maintain that silence.
And I think that leads us to our next point of deciding how to intervene. And there are several factors to consider here. And again, we can't really go very in depth, but some of those factors are: what is the context? Are you at school? Are you at church? Are you at work? Are you in a grocery market? What's the behavior? Is the person lecturing someone, asking inappropriate questions, yelling at someone? Is the person getting violent? What's your relationship with the principles of what's happening and what do you know about this? But also, where do you stand on the thing? Sometimes it requires a shit ton of conviction to be able to stand up and say, no, that's not right. Like being in a situation where someone is like, one more person tells me I have white privilege, I'm going to escort them off the property with a gun. And being willing to be the person to say, but you do have white privilege. Um, is that the wisest choice? Maybe not. You could say, okay, we're not able to have a like conductive conversation. I'm going to walk away. That's also an intervention sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, and then recognizing what the risk to the person being mistreated is and to you. So again, risk evaluation sometimes has to happen really quickly. So we encourage you to think about it now.
Right.
Did I miss
Yeah.
anything?
It's a lot easier to make the right decision if you've thought through the decisions and the options when your adrenaline is not pumping at max volume. And this is the kind of thing that, lots of professionals train very specifically for, right? So professions like, police, EMTs, firefighters, the military, and, air traffic controllers, emergency medicine docs and nurses, and all of those folks, they train certain reactions in low stress environments where everybody knows, hey, this is just a drill, it's just a training exercise, so that when it's not a drill, when it's for real, people
No
have already
excuse.
thought through the options, and making the right decision is just a whole lot easier. Because you're not having to do the sort of higher level problem solving as you're also trying to work on your own anxiety, your own massive adrenaline dump, all of that other stuff.
Yeah. This is a bit of an extreme example, but I'm a teacher and I taught at a school where there was a mass shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I had to have to consider as a teacher in this day and age is if an event like that happens, how do I protect my students?
Mm-hmm.
There are protections I can do that, like, I can lock the door, we can barricade the door, we can hide in a corner or in a closet, or I can help get people out, whatever. And we train for that as teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because, like, the all the things you named, you don't think teachers in that list until you have to think teachers are on that list.
Right, exactly.
And so I think the other context that I didn't consider, like, that I didn't name, is if you have someone with you, like if you have small children with you, maybe that's not the time to go interrupt something
Right.
happening. But at minimum, you can call someone,
Mm-hmm.
you can do something that doesn't put more people in harm's way, because you don't, like, if you have children, you don't want them to be harmed.
Right.
But you do want them to see you do something,
Mm-hmm.
because children follow what's modeled for them.
Right. And, there are interactions or interventions that I might consider if I'm somewhere sort of quote unquote by myself, that I might not consider if my wife is with me. And vice versa. There are certain interactions or interventions that are kind of off the table for me if I'm by myself, but that might be okay if my wife is with me. Like if I see a woman being harassed, there are ways that I can intervene on her behalf if my wife is with me, to sort of let her know that she's safe, rather than having her have to wonder, is this another guy who's going to like add to the problem? Right.
Yeah. And how you intervene, like, whether you direct your intervention towards the person being harmed or towards the person doing harm, is informed by things like if your wife is with you. So if
Right.
your wife isn't with you and you want to intervene in that situation, intervene with the person doing the harm.
Right. Exactly. I'm much more likely in that situation to, you know, go to the guy and try to distract his attention away so that, the woman being harassed can, escape from the situation or whatever. But, it's those kinds of things that set the context.
Yeah.
Another factor that we've talked about that bears consideration is, what's the problematic behavior? Is it two people saying, stupid stuff in line at Starbucks behind you and you're overhearing them? Or is it, somebody uh, berating a person very loudly in a public place in a way that seems to threaten violence? Like those are two different scenarios.
Even if it's like the difference between someone saying, like, two people having a conversation behind you and intervening in that versus someone having the conversation with you,
Right.
where it's less of a bystander intervention. But if you're not the affected party and you're hearing someone say messed up stuff, that's different. Like, they're saying it to you. Intervening in that is still an intervention,
Right.
and it's going to be taken differently than if you are intervening in that conversation that's happening behind you at Starbucks.
Right. Um, Another factor is, what's your relationship to the principals? Is the person who is exhibiting the problematic behavior somebody you know, or is it a stranger? Is it an employee or, a subordinate, or is it like your boss?
Yeah.
Is the person you're intervening on behalf of a friend, a coworker, a family member, a stranger? Like, all of those things. Relationships matter, and it's worthwhile paying attention to those. And then also, and we just got done talking about risk, but what is the risk to you in the different possible interventions? And also, what is the risk to the individual involved? That I don't want my intervention on behalf of a certain person to increase the risk to that person, either in that moment or later.
Can I provide an example?
Please do.
As a white person, if I see a person of color being harassed or insert issue, I am more hesitant to call the police because they are a person of color and may be targeted inherently
Mhm.
because of institutionalized racism.
Right.
So that entirely that risk entirely changes how I'm going to intervene in the situation.
Mhm.
Um, we want to provide you with a framework for intervening. And this is a very basic framework and usually would be used for something that has not gotten, say, physically violent or too heated, but politely interrupt, like, excuse me, I overheard this conversation, insert here. Intervene respectfully. Actually, we don't use that language anymore. Or, hey, that language is kind of problematic. I really don't want to hear it. I'm sure certain this person doesn't want to hear it. Let's not. If you're intervening and you are kind of in a position of power, you might use a framework of introducing and reminding. So, like, hey, we're working towards creating an affirming space here. Please refrain from using that language moving forward. And if they don't, you remind them. And then at some point, you may have to escalate it to asking someone to leave, right? And one of the really important parts of this framework is actually debriefing with the affected parties. So asking the person, hey, I saw this happen. Do you feel it was handled appropriately? Would you have liked me to handle it differently, etc. Um, so we're going to work through some examples. I just read the title of the slide on the outline. Examples slash role play, a skit starring Diz and Bob. So one of the examples is I'm going to come out to Bob. Bob's going to ask me a very important question. Hey Bob, I I use they them pronouns and I was wondering if you could use those for me from now on.
Absolutely. I will do my best to get to do that appropriately. If I hear someone misgendering you, how would you like me to respond to that?
Well, I'd like you to interrupt if it's not someone in my family, because
Okay.
someone in my family, it's not necessarily worth that interruption. Or I might say something similar. We might also ask, are those the pronouns you would like me to use in all circumstances?
Mhm.
So as a
Are
teacher,
there
I ask,
cases you would like me to not use those pronouns?
or to avoid pronouns altogether. Um, in our second scenario, a coworker is misgendering a colleague. Yeah, so I was talking to Lot this week, and he was saying that like we needed to do XYZ.
Actually, Lot uses they them pronouns, so just something to keep in mind. But yeah, I think they might be right. We might need to do XYZ.
Um, I'm so sorry. I know Lot uses they them pronouns. I should be getting that right. What
Hey,
is wrong with me? I'm such a terrible person. What the heck?
KCN, whoa, it's fine. You made a mistake. We, when we know better, we do better and we move on. So moving on back to the topic at hand, I think Lot has a good point about doing XYZ. And, let's consider how we're going to bring that into reality here.
So we actually just covered two scenarios there, right? The first is me misgendering a colleague, Lot. And the second is I'm apologizing and making the apology about me when it's not about me. And my feelings on the matter don't matter here. Like I can deal with those in private, but I don't have to put that on anyone else, especially if Lot had been in the room.
Mhm.
And Bob's intervention of redirecting what's happening is actually really great because it it's an interruption. It's polite. It is a reminder like, hey, when we know better, we do better. And we move on from from that part of the conversation. Now, if we wanted to debrief with that later, you might say, hey, we're outside of this conversation and I saw you kind of derail over this. And here is why that might be problematic because it might make, like, if you did that in front of Lot, it might make Lot feel like they had to tell you it's okay when it isn't.
We're like,
Um,
they're the problem.
yeah. And we don't want people to feel like that. So we're going to debrief on that conversation. And that gives me a learning moment. It gives me an opportunity to say, oh, I never thought about it like that. Or, oh, you're right. Thank you for reminding me. Um, our third scenario is a gender ambiguous person is accosted and berated when entering a public restroom. So the way to intervene in this, and I've had to do this, so I'm going to assume Bob doesn't mind me taking this one. If you see someone being harassed and like as they enter a restroom, interrupt and say, "Hey, we don't know who this person is. Maybe just let them go to the bathroom. That's all they want to do." If they're spewing things like trans people are just trying to attack women and children, you can say, actually, statistically, that's wrong. Like Bob modeled or had the conversation earlier. Um, I could also direct my conversation to the person who wants to go to the bathroom and say, hey, I see that this is happening. Would you like me to walk you in, stay with you, and walk you out? Those are options. There's also options of kind of playing that silent witness peacekeeper role a little bit and just distract the person
Mhm.
that is being a problem or that is being problematic. We don't want to label people as problems, but to distract that person and say, hey, you know what, I actually really need your help with something. um can can you help me find an employee, like something happened, whatever.
Your shirt, the old,
I don't recommend that. That's the type of person who would probably have you arrested for assault.
or throw a punch. But I mean, hey, like it would definitely distract them.
And that's a risk assessment of what are you willing to do, how are you willing to do it, etc.
And the reason that I had suggested this scenario when we were planning this episode is I recently read a news story about a cisgender woman walking into a ladies' room in a public store, and some self-important jackwagon who decided they didn't look feminine enough to be using the ladies' room started berating them about, using the bathroom that they should be using. And like nobody really stepped forward
Yeah.
until store security came over and said, "What the hell's going on?" And, unfortunately, we live in an era when, you know, nobody is necessarily immune to this.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to be clear that that's not a recent thing. I saw a post recently where someone was like, this used to never happen to butch lesbians until trans people came along. Well, one, trans people have always existed.
Mm-hmm.
And two, yes, it did.
Mm-hmm.
Masculine presenting or butch women have been harassed using bathrooms for as long as they have existed.
Right.
And as you said, no one is immune. If a person's got a bug up their butt about something, they're going to find someone to target with that bug up their butt.
Right. And you're absolutely right, because some of these folks actively sort of wander through the world looking for opportunities to be upset, offended, and to, vent their spleen on somebody who they perceive to be um, an easy target.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, it's just like bullies in high school,
Yep.
which is what most of these people were at one point in their lives. And, there again, this is why intervention matters.
Yeah. And we far from advocate violence. We do not advocate violence here. From my personal perspective, there are situations where violence may become necessary, but in most everyday situations, no.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to be clear that harassment is a form of violence. Derogatory language is a form of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, through bystander intervention on harassment, derogatory language, etc., we are trying to make the world a less violent place. And that's really important.
And also, it makes a difference to the other people standing by and seeing this happen. It might give them the courage to intervene next time. It
Or
might,
that
or that time, it might make them feel like they're not the only person who finds this behavior objectionable. And it might make the, hateful bigots in the world realize that they are not the majority. And I firmly believe that they are not the majority. But as you said, they thrive when good people remain silent.
definitely. I think we're ready to put it into practice. How about you?
I think so. So, for putting it into practice this week, we have a couple of things we'd like to ask you to do. First, we'd like to ask you to think about your experience, good or bad, as a bystander or as the beneficiary of bystander interventions. What went well? What didn't go well? And what would you do differently if the same situation occurred today? The second thing we'd like to ask you to do is with a trusted person, whether it's a spouse, a friend, a family member, whoever, um, talk through some likely situations that you might encounter and what the potential interventions might be. What might the risks be? How would you manage those risks for yourself and for other people involved? How would you decide what interventions to use? Again, as we said earlier, these are the kinds of things that become a lot easier if we've thought through them before the stakes are really high and the adrenaline is running fast. And
I want to Can I provide an example real quick?
please do.
Have a conversation with, your brother, your cousin, whatever. What are you going to do when grandpa goes on a racist rant at Thanksgiving? Or when mom asks your sister about her roommate who she's had for 10 years and who is actually her wife? Like, have the conversations, not just about hypothetical situations outside of your home. Be willing to have the conversations if you can safely do so within your home
Mm-hmm.
and when the affected people aren't in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Also, as always, if you have thoughts or perspectives or questions on any of the stuff that we've shared today, we hope that you will leave that in the comments on this podcast, or we've got a anonymous Google form that you can use to leave feedback on the website, and we hope that you'll do that. And we would very much like to hear your stories and experiences and perspectives on bystander interventions and uh, thoughts you have on how to do this well, or times you've seen it done well or done poorly, or questions that you have about how to do it well,
Or
and
responses
how
to
to
what
do it
we've
safely.
said.
Right. Or responses to what we've said. If you think we're, full of hot air, tell us that. I mean, we're going to ignore you because we ignore people who tell us we're wrong. Oh, wait,
No,
you told me I can't do that anymore. Sorry. No, we're not going to ignore you. But by all means, please, if you think we're off base on something, please tell us because, hey, we're still learning too. At least I am. This is a little bit of an expert, but I am definitely still learning. So we would love to have your feedback.
today's episode, we have talked about bystander intervention, the act of intervening when something is wrong and something is unethical or problematic happening in your space, in front of you, etc. We have asked you to assess your risk tolerance. What are you willing to do? What risks are you willing to take on? And to intervene accordingly. We'd also to ask others how they'd want you to intervene if you see a circumstance. So, for example, in our scenarios, Bob asking me how I'd want him to intervene if he saw someone or heard someone misgendering me. Today's episode is a heavy topic, and we can only scratch the surface in a single episode. So, if you want to see us go deeper, let us know. My parting thoughts for the day are I encourage you to intervene even if you risk being wrong, even if you're not sure how to do the thing, or writing in and asking us, like, hey, how would I tell grandpa not to say the racist thing at Thanksgiving? Right? Um, we're happy to have those conversations. And I think having these conversations, whether you're having them with us, with your friends, your family, or like Bob and I are having these conversations with each other, and I know I've learned from having this conversation today. Being willing to learn is a way to intervene in itself. So that's what I have.
My parting thought is never underestimate the difference that you can make for somebody else when you intervene. Um, we know the statistics tell us that, for instance, trans teenagers who have one affirming adult in their life are many, many, many times less likely to attempt self harm than trans teenagers who don't have that one affirming person in their life. This is a way of being that affirming person, not just for a trans kid or an LGBTQ kid, but for any marginalized person who may feel completely alone in that. Just having that one person who speaks up, who doesn't let it slide, who stands up and says, no, this is wrong, that can be a lifeline of hope for somebody that can absolutely save their life. So it really does matter when we do this. As scary and as challenging as it may be, it really does matter.
It really does. And the people who intervene, they stick with you.
Mhm.
I know the people who have intervened on my behalf have stuck with me for a very long time in
Mhm.
many ways. This has been the Affirming Practice Podcast. I am Dr. Casey M. Brimmer, and I'm reminding you to take care of yourself because you're too important not to.
And I am Pastor Bob Irian, and I am reminding you that you matter, you are valid, you are precious, and you are deeply and profoundly loved, exactly as you are, not in spite of who you are. Be safe.
Until next time,
Bye
bye,
bye.
y'all.